Hello, I'm Mr. Swapnil Sazni from Department of Mechanical Engineering, Sharad Institute of Technology Polytechnic, and I am teaching the subject management. So we will continue with the second lecture today, that is planning and organizing at supervisory level. So before starting this lecture, we will first take a review of all the points which we have discussed in the first lecture. So in the first lecture, we have seen what is planning, we have seen its definition. After that, we have seen what is the importance of planning, or we can say what are the advantages of planning. After that, we have seen what is the concept of supervisor, or the difference between supervisor and supervision. So supervisor is actually the person, and supervision is the process which is done by that person. After that, we have seen what is the planning at supervisory level. Then after that, we have seen supervisory planning for resource use. So in that, we have also seen resources such as manpower, or space utilization, or work related for planning with work schedules, or the working environment, and all those things. So these points were included in supervisory planning for resource use. Then after that, we have also seen what are the limitations of planning, such as change in technology, emergency situations, prediction of things in the future. So all these factors can cause the failure of planning. So these were the limitations which we have seen, and we concluded our first lecture with difference between supervisory planning and managerial planning. So in that, we have seen what actually planning is done by the supervisor, and we have compared this planning with the planning that is done by the top level or middle level management, that is by the managers. So now we will start with new point today, that is characteristics of planning. So we will see all the characteristics one by one. The first characteristics of planning is it is an intellectual process. So first we should know what is the actual meaning of intellectual process. So it means that thinking before doing. So planning is an intellectual process. We will see now why we call it as intellectual process. The success of planning depends on the manager and his ability to collect the facts which are likely to affect the planning. So whether these facts are connected with the present situation or the estimated future changings, how correctly he studies and evaluates these facts, and how correctly he takes his decisions on their basis. So the entire process happens to be intellectual, and for this successful completion of all these activities, the planner should have imaginative power as well as good decision making capacity. A planner will mainly consider the following questions, such as what is to be done, how is it to be done, when is it to be done, or by whom is it to be done. So the manager or the supervisor will plan according to these questions. So taking decisions on all these questions depends on the intelligence of the planner. Hence it is said that planning requires thinking at every step. So we call planning as an intellectual process. The second important characteristic of planning is the selection of the best alternative. There can be many ways of doing a work, and the planner selects the best possible alternative. Thus, it is said that planning involves the selection of best alternative, and also at the same time a rejection of the inappropriate possible alternatives. So in many organizations, there are many alternatives for the given problem. So to tackle such type of problems, there is one technique which we call as a brainstorming session. So I will tell a little bit about this, what is the meaning of brainstorming. So brainstorming means it involves a group of people who are working on particular project. So the supervisor or the planner or the head of that project, he calls all the employees who will be working on that project, and he discussed that problem with the teammates, and then they take feedback from all the employees, and so that they will have number of alternatives to tackle that problem. Then after taking a brief review on each and every alternative, they finally select which one will be the best alternative to tackle that problem. So this is called as a brainstorming session. So planning is nothing but selection of the best alternative. The third characteristic of planning is it is the primary function of management. So planning is the first and most important function of management, and all the other functions such as organizing, staffing, leading, and controlling, they all come later. In the absence of planning, no other function of management can be completed. Planning is the function of management which is required at every step. We cannot stay relaxed once the planning is complete, because if suddenly any problem arises, then immediately the necessary changes are to be implemented. In reality, planning is required in the performance of other functions of management. Without planning, neither the organization can be created nor staffing can be done. Similarly, planning is also needed in case of leading and controlling. The next characteristic is planning is forecasting. First, we should understand what is the meaning of forecasting. So forecasting means predicting the future based on past and present data and the experience of that person. Thus, experience is very important criteria for the successful prediction or forecasting. To understand this concept of forecasting, I will give an example. Many times during a cricket match, we try to predict that which team is going to win. So how we predict this? We actually consider all the aspects such as what players are involved in that team, or how was their previous performance, or who is the captain, how is the pitch of the ground, or what are the environmental conditions, or who wants the toss. So all these information is nothing but the data, and this data helps us to predict which team is going to win this match. So in a similar fashion, if we speak about the industry, then for the successful completion of project, such type of forecasting is necessary. Planning always takes into consideration about the future. Under planning, on the basis of collected facts or data, the future is determined, and accordingly appropriate decisions are taken. Thus, we can say that forecasting is the essence or requirement of planning. The next characteristic is planning is a continuous process. Planning is that process which begins with the establishment of the organization and it ends with the organization. In other words, we can say that the process of planning continues so long as the organization continues to exist. A manager or supervisor starts planning before the work is started, and when one work is accomplished, planning for the other begins, and this process goes on continuing. So it is a never-ending process. In many organizations, we can see the PDA cycle, which is that shown in figure. PDCA cycle is nothing but plan, do, check, and act. So initially, for completion of the project, a particular plan is prepared. This plan is then implemented. The performance of that plan is checked, and then it is decided whether to go with the same plan or the plan needs to be modified. So in this way, the PDCA cycle runs, and thus we can say that planning is a continuous process. The next characteristic is planning is flexible. So in the previous slides, we have seen that planning is related with forecasting, and forecasting is nothing but predicting about the future. So since we are predicting about the future based on present and past situations or data available, we cannot assure or guarantee that whatever the supervisor or manager has forecasted, the same thing will happen. So such type of planning is very much uncertain. So we have to be prepared for whatever the changes which are required to be done if in case some kind of emergency situation arises. So we call it as flexibility. So making changes in the plan as per the requirement is nothing but flexibility. So whenever the supervisor finds that the things are not going according to his plan, then he immediately brings some changes in his planning according to the changed facts or situations. It is thus said that planning is a flexible process. The next characteristic of planning is that it is goal oriented. As shown in this picture, there is one saying that a goal without a plan is just a wish. This statement actually means that there are many things in our life that we want, but to achieve all these things, there should be a perfect plan. However, if there is no any planning done, then it becomes very difficult to achieve that goal, and it will just remain as a wish forever in our life. In a similar way, any organization with some predetermined objectives and planning tells us how to achieve those objectives. Firstly, all the objectives of the organization are determined and then planning is made to achieve them. Thus, it is clear that planning without some objectives is meaningless, and so we say that planning is goal oriented. Planning is also an interdependent process. So the meaning of interdependent means the process which is depending on the other. So to understand this, we can just consider the example which is given here. We can see that a number of rocks are placed so that they are forming one cave-like structure. So in this diagram, we can see that several number or several pebbles of rocks are placed one above the other. So in this diagram, even if a single piece of rock falls down, then we can say that this entire structure will get collapsed. So this is nothing but dependency of each pebble with the other one. So since all these pebbles of rocks are dependent, we can say that the structure is stable. In a similar way, the activities of many organizations are divided into many departments, such as a purchase department or a sales department, production department, finance department, or a personal department, etc. So all these departments have their own separate plans, which are the parts of a master plan. All the departmental plans depend on each other. If there is some change in any part of a particular department, then due to that reason, the plans of the other departments have also to be modified. For example, if the sales department achieves more sales than the expected quantity, then its plan shall have to be modified, resulting in more purchases and production to cope with the demand of the sales department. This in turn also forces the necessary changes in the plans of the purchase as well as production department. Thus, departmental planning depends on each other. So we say that planning is an interdependent process. Now we will see the last characteristic of planning, which is planning leads to efficiency and economy. So planning makes it possible to utilize the available human as well as material resources in most favorable manner in an organization. Capital, labor, material, machinery, all these resources are to be utilized in a manner to produce the maximum quantity of the best quality goods with minimum cost. So this will help us to increase the efficiency of the organization, as efficiency is nothing but output to input, or we call it as the ratio of output to input. So with minimum input we are supposed to increase our output, and if we are able to achieve this efficiency, then definitely the economy of the organization will grow. So these were all the characteristics of planning. We will now start with a new point, that is planning activities, detailing and following of each step. First we will see what is the information needed for planning activities. While planning, the first thing that supervisor should know is the exact number of jobs to be done. So whether 100 jobs are to be done or 1000 jobs, likewise the exact count of the job is required. Once the quantity is determined, then next comes quality. The expected job might require several number of operations on it, and few operations might be very much critical, like for example tolerance or limits that are given to the job may be very difficult, or a selection of material for manufacturing that job might be difficult. The next information needed is the available resources such as workers, staff, machine, equipments and tools. The supervisor should have all detailed information regarding the resources, like for example if we are having 20 machines, then whether all those machines are working or not. So if we assume that if 2 machines are not operating well, then the supervisor has to take this point into consideration while planning. Then the next part is related with procedure or a sequence of operations. Supervisor should make proper sequence of operation so that the job is completed with minimum internal transportations and least time. The supervisor then has to calculate the total time required to manufacture all the given jobs. He also has to consider the dependency of operation for smooth flow of work. Many times what actually happens is industries are outsourcing, that is few operations that are required to be carried out on that job, those operations are done by the other vendors, or we can say that a third party. So this is done when specific operations are to be done which are on very costly machine, or if the number of jobs that are to be manufactured is very much less. So these are all the points or information that is needed for planning activities. There are many steps while the supervisor is planning the activity. So we call it as detailing or steps in planning activities. We will just go through all the steps that are required for planning. So the first step is study of requirements. The supervisor will study about the requirements, like how many total strength of employees or workers will be required so that the project can be completed in the given time. So study of requirement is the first step. Then after this the supervisor will understand the targets. So target will include how much exact timing or duration is given for the completion of that project, and regarding the quality and quantity of the jobs that are to be done. After understanding the targets, the next step in planning activity is study of drawing and design. So whenever a job is given to the company, along with that job the supervisor has to make a good study of the drawing and accordingly the design of that job. After a drawing and design study, the supervisor will then decide the action plan. So action plan is nothing but the total plan from the start of the job up to the final dispatch of that job. So all the activities will be included in this action plan, and this plan is usually made on the paper. Then after deciding the action plan, next will be selection of machine. So in this step, the supervisor will decide what type of job is available, and accordingly what operations are to be done on that job. So accordingly, he will select what machines are required for manufacturing that job. After selection of machine, the next step is the decision about equipments and tools. So for carrying out several operations on that job, he will also list out what equipments and tools that are necessary. After deciding the equipments and tools, the next step is selection of raw material and supporting material. So based on the quantity, the supervisor will decide that how much amount of raw material is required, as accordingly he has to give that information to the purchase department so that the sufficient quantity of raw material is made available. After selection of raw material, the next step will be finding out suitable persons to work. This is the most important step, because if the supervisor failed to allocate appropriate work to the best suitable persons, then the quality of job will be affected, and also the time or duration which is set to complete the entire target will be not completed in exact time. So it is very much necessary that the suitable persons are to be found out by the supervisor, and accordingly the work is allocated to those suitable persons. After selecting the persons, next point is allocating time for each operation. As the project is to be completed in the specified duration, it is necessary that for each operation the timing parameter is to be measured. So for each operation, the supervisor should allocate the necessary or desired required timing. After allocating timing for each operation, the next step will be making suitable arrangement for dependent operation. Many times there are a sequence of machines through which the job has to pass. So if any machine is not working properly, then he has to make some replacement for that, because if the job is going through several number of machines, then due to one particular machine, the entire work process may get hampered or it may stop. So proper arrangements for dependent operation is to be clearly observed by the supervisor, and accordingly decisions should be taken. After making arrangement for a dependent operation, the next step will be making some alternative plans. As just now I told that if several number of machines are required, or in case of dependent operations, if suddenly any machine is breakdown, then there should be some alternative plan, or else the entire production will stop. So there should be some alternative plan the supervisor should have, so that in case of some this kind of emergency situation occurs, then the second plan or plan B will work out. After making alternative plan, the next step will be assigning work to the people. So the specific information should be provided to the worker regarding what work has been allocated to him. After assigning work to the people, the next step is deciding the reporting authority for each activity. If there are several number of operations to be carried out for the completion of project, then it is better to divide all the tasks into several parts, and for each part if there is one reporting authority, then the task becomes easy. So there should be some reporting authority for each activity. After this, the next step is rescheduling if required. So the supervisor should also plan for rescheduling if there is any requirement. After rescheduling, the next step is confirming authorities and responsibilities. The supervisor should make aware all the employees regarding their responsibilities, and also about the authorities to whom the employees should report. So after confirming authorities and responsibilities, the next step is planning documentation and preparing formats for that. So we will see this point, that is what are the formats for various process in further slides. So after documentation is completed and preparing format making is complete, then the next step will be readiness for uncertain happening. The supervisor should always have plan B, because in case if any emergency case occurs while production, then it will not affect the production. Next step is plan of communication method. So there should be a good communication in between the supervisor and all the employees, so that the day-to-day activities which are going on the shop floor, that can be communicated with the supervisor. And in case if there is any lag in between the production plan and target, then it can be overcome by making suitable changes in the plan. And the last step of planning activity is making arrangement for measuring the work performance and the quality of work. So these are all the steps which are necessary in planning activities. So now we will stop here for today, and in the next lecture we will start with a new point. Thank you.